On a cold December night in 1975, the old Dutch colonial house at 112 Ocean Avenue stood quietly under a pale Long Island moon. From the outside, it looked peaceful, even welcoming, with its gambrel roof and dark shutters watching the canal behind it. But inside, the air carried a weight that never truly lifted, a heaviness left behind by violence and grief. Just over a year earlier, the DeFeo family had been murdered there while they slept. 6 people, shot one by one in their beds. The town of Amityville had tried to move on, but the house did not forget. When George and Kathy Lutz first saw the property, they knew its history. Everyone did. The price was unusually low for a waterfront home, and the real estate agent spoke carefully, as if choosing each word might keep the past from waking up. The Lutzes talked it over. They were newly married, hopeful, and determined to build a future together. Kathy had 3 children from a previous marriage, Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa, and they needed space. The house was beautiful, solid, and affordable. They told themselves that walls did not remember pain, that evil could not linger in wood and stone. On December 18, they signed the papers. The move-in day felt like a fresh start. Snow lay thin on the ground, and the canal behind the house was still. The children ran through the rooms, claiming bedrooms, laughing, filling the silence with life. George focused on practical things, unpacking boxes, fixing small issues, planning improvements. Kathy tried to make the house feel warm, hanging curtains, arranging furniture, lighting candles. Yet from the beginning, there were small things that unsettled them. The house felt cold even when the heat was on. Certain rooms seemed darker than they should have been. At night, strange creaks echoed through the halls, but old houses made noise, they told themselves. They pushed their doubts aside. A priest came to bless the house. Father Pecoraro was a friend of the family, and as January settled in, the cold inside the house grew sharper, not just in temperature but in feeling. Kathy began waking every morning with unexplained bruises on her body. Long, finger-shaped marks appeared on her arms and legs, dark and painful, as if someone had grabbed her in anger during the night. George insisted it was stress, that she must be hurting herself without realizing it, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he knew something was very wrong. The children started acting out in ways that frightened Kathy. Daniel became withdrawn and aggressive, snapping at his siblings and refusing to sleep alone. Christopher cried at night, claiming someone stood in the hallway watching him. Melissa continued speaking happily to Jody, waving at empty corners of her room, giggling as if nothing were wrong. The contrast terrified Kathy more than the fear itself. It felt as though the house had chosen how to affect each of them. George's attachment to the house deepened into something unhealthy. He spent hours sitting in silence, staring at the walls, his thoughts distant and unreadable. He neglected work, lost interest in finances, and brushed off overdue bills. Kathy tried to reason with him, but every conversation ended in anger. When she suggested leaving, even temporarily, George exploded. His face twisted with rage, his voice rising as if someone else were speaking through him. He accused her of trying to destroy their family, of betraying him. Minutes later, he would calm down, confused by his own outburst. At night, the house became unbearable. The sounds were no longer subtle. Footsteps moved through the halls. Doors slammed violently. The staircase creaked as if someone heavy climbed it slowly, step by step. Kathy once heard chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing faintly through the walls. When she woke George, the sound stopped instantly, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. One evening, Kathy decided to clean the upstairs sewing RO. The night that followed felt different from all the others. The air inside the house was thick and heavy, pressing down on Kathy's chest until each breath felt like work. She lay awake listening to the slow ticking of the clock, aware of every sound, every shift of the walls. Somewhere deep in the house, something moved, not in a hurry, not hiding anymore. It felt deliberate, as if the house itself had decided it was time. Around 3:15 in the morning, George woke suddenly, sitting upright in bed. His body was tense, his breathing shallow. Kathy felt it instantly, that familiar dread wrapping around her heart. Before she could speak, a low sound echoed through the hallway, like a distant drumbeat. The walls began to tremble softly, and the temperature dropped so fast that their breath fogged the air. The children started crying out almost at once. Kathy rushed from room to room, gathering them together despite her shaking hands. Daniel clung to her, his face pale. Christopher sobbed uncontrollably, pointing toward the ceiling, saying someone was walking above them. Melissa stood quietly, staring into space, her expression calm in a way that chilled Kathy more than fear ever could. She whispered that Jody was angry, that he did not want them to leave. George wandered through the house as if in a trance. He spoke in a low, unfamiliar voice, muttering words that made no sense. Kathy tried to reach him, grabbing his arm, but he pulled away with surprising strength. His eyes were dark, distant, fixed on something only he could see. For a terrifying moment, Kathy feared the house had taken him completely. The noises grew louder. A deep rumbling shook the floors. Cracks appeared along the walls, spreading like veins. The front door rattled violently in its frame. Outside, a fierce wind howled, slamming against the house from all sides, even though the weather had been calm hours earlier. The house groaned, not like wood under pressure, but like something alive in pain. The Lutz family never returned to the house. As dawn broke, they arrived at the home of friends, exhausted, shaken, and hollowed out by fear. The children fell asleep almost immediately, their bodies finally giving in after weeks of tension. Kathy sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, replaying every moment in her mind, afraid that if she closed her eyes she would see the house again. George sat nearby in silence, his face pale, his confidence shattered. Whatever had held him in that place had released him the moment they crossed its boundary. In the days that followed, the weight of what they had experienced began to sink in. Away from 112, Ocean Avenue, George slowly returned to himself. The anger faded. The strange obsessions vanished. He spoke openly about the voices, the overwhelming urge to protect the house, the feeling that something inside it had been guiding his thoughts. Kathy listened, realizing just how close she had come to losing him, not to death, but to something worse. The house had almost claimed his mind. News of their escape spread quickly. Friends, neighbors, and eventually the media wanted answers. Why had they left so suddenly? What had happened inside the infamous Amityville house? At first, the Lutzes tried to stay quiet, hoping distance would erase the memories. But the nightmares followed them. Kathy still woke with bruises that faded only after weeks. George dreamed of dark corridors and whispering voices calling him back. The children refused to sleep alone, terrified of the dark. Paranormal investigators were eventually brought in. Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the house, conducting their own examination. What they claimed to encounter only deepened the mystery. They spoke of overwhelming evil, of a presence that reacted violently to prayer, of impressions of suffering and rage embedded in the walls. Photographs taken during the investigation appeared to show strange figures, including what looked like a child's face with GL.